is the 416 Ministries podcast. This is the interview series, and today we're sitting down with Preston Silcox, and Cindy's behind the camera, and so thankful for being able to be here this weekend and to worship here with y'all, and thanks for the opportunity to speak as well. But we wanted to sit down and talk about the work here, but before we do that, if you'll take a moment just to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your family here and where we are.
Okay, so I am Preston Silcox. I preach for the Church of Christ at Avalon. We're in Milton, Florida, which is just outside of Pensacola, Florida, which is lower Alabama, basically. Milton is, Avalon is inside of Milton, basically, just a community inside of Milton, but I understand Milton just passed the 10,000 mark, so we're kind of a small town outside of a somewhat larger town. A lot of military, a lot of people, a lot of retirees from the military. It's an interesting place in regards to that. I've seen this my entire life. People, especially in the military, they come through, they're stationed around one of our bases or whatever for a little while, and then they come back years later retiring here. So It's just kind of an interesting scenario with that. But so I'm married to Tanya, my wife, Tanya Silcox. We have 2 children. Now we just inherited or just gained a third one, I guess, a son-in-law. So Rice is our son. He is 25. Curry is now Curry Webster. So kind of getting used to that. And our son-in-law is Daniel. Let's see, we're from here. We're from the Pensacola area. Mm-hmm. We got married in 1993. Moved to Memphis to go to the School of Preaching. After that, we moved to Martin, Tennessee, then Muskogee, Oklahoma, back here to Milton, Florida to preach for the Margaret Street congregation, and then eventually we planted the Avalon Church.
All right. Well, you mentioned MSOP, so let's go there for just a moment. And so what years were you there?
93 to 95.
93. So you graduated in 95, and so tell us a little bit about that time frame. Some of the instructors maybe, and who was directing. Brother Cates, I'm assuming, was directing at that point. So just talk about that, maybe a couple of highlights from your time there.
Okay. This is really neat, because so we've been in this building. This is weird. I just went straight to us in the building here, and we're talking about Memphis, but I'll get to where we're going. We moved into the building here about a year ago, so I was able to unpack my library and all of my memorabilia. Sorry about that. And a lot of this was it was nostalgia for, in fact, I was just cleaning out a couple of things now and just looking back and thinking about all of these memories. But yeah, Brother Cates, he was the director. I was looking at a little thing that he signed for me. Just a quick story. He had just written the Noahic flood. I think I was first year. And so he was giving a copy to all the students, and so he starts signing it to me. To my dearly beloved, great friend and gospel preacher. Now, what's your name? and then he finishes it out. So it was a great time at the Memphis School of Preaching. Just having Brother Cates as the director, that was great.
Yeah.
But great memories. That's what I was getting at regarding my office. Just going through a lot of old memories. Brother Elkins was there, obviously, and Brother Curry. In fact, my daughter that I mentioned just a moment ago was named after Brother Curry. So just a lot of great memories. Appreciate the school. I don't know that I can express it. Shortly after I became a Christian, I'll back up. I became a Christian in 1990, wasn't raised in a Christian home, so obeyed the gospel in 1990. And then from 90, obviously, to 93, making the decision to go to the School of Preaching. And so I didn't have a lot of experience as a Christian, first of all. Yeah. And so I was basically immersed into the School of Preaching shortly after becoming a Christian. But I was told by Bobby Liddell, who was the preacher at Bellevue at the time, who also baptized me, said that it would be the best 2 years of my life. Mm-hmm. And so I think I went in with that mindset. I was anticipating the best 2 years, and I would say that those were 2 of the best years of my life and my wife's life. I mean, that's the foundation of everything that we've done since that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and Brother Cates was still there, but Brother Liddell was actually directing when I went through school. So.
Okay. Yep.
That's something that every alumnus that goes through the school or comes out of the school, I should say, they talk about the best 2 years of their life. You know, and so I know that it's not just hyped up as, from recruiting
Right.
standpoint.
Right.
It is, but it is truly the best 2 years. I mean, it's the hardest, and I heard guys, talk
Yeah.
about that, and it was hard for us when we went through it as well. But it's from the standpoint of the camaraderie, the brethren that you're there with, that you're in the trenches with while you're in school.
Yeah.
That puts together a bond that that I know that you have. Your buddies that you went through school with. Still that you're in contact with as we are. When I think about, is there any advice that you would give maybe to somebody that's looking to go to school, whether younger or older, maybe?
Right before we went to move, there was a preacher, Ray Peters, who was also a graduate of the school. He was at our sending off ceremony or whatever, and he made the comment. He said that what you're going to learn at Memphis is what you're going to gain from Memphis is you're going to learn how to study.
Yeah.
And I think that was great for me. There are a lot of people, obviously, a lot smarter than me. Again, I was not raised in the church. I was really embarrassed that there were little kids running around me, that knew more about the Bible than I did. Mm. So I went in with, I was hungry, and I was definitely growing and learning the Bible, but obviously I didn't know it. And so it's a great opportunity to gain a lot of knowledge, and then how to build on top of that knowledge. I was not a student before I went to the school of preaching, and it helped me be the student that I should be. Obviously, we could always do better, but it taught me how to study.
Yeah.
And that was a huge thing. And another thing that I gained from this, I think, in hindsight, and I saw this very quickly, I started seeing the practical advice that the instructors were giving, like forewarning us. You're going to experience this.
Right.
Watch out for this. Watch out for that. And sure enough, having been forewarned, you kind of see it coming, and you can kind of navigate some of the difficulties that a lot of people have. And I think you need to take that kind of advice very seriously. If you're taking notes or whatever, and you're taking notes from the text, and then the instructor said something about local work and what you might as well write that in your notes, because that's going to come back up too.
Yeah. I agree. And I remember a lot of that, and having gone through the school, having preached for a while and then gone to school, when I would hear those stories too, I go, yes, I wish I would have known that ahead of time too.
You experienced it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
And so that's 100% true. And I think Brother Peters, giving that advice, and he spoke to our class as well too. Brother Peters is great. The thing that I remember him talking about, was, you're going to have the tools that you need.
Yep.
And studying was obviously the big portion of that, learning how to study. And so I think that's
in
great.
fact, I think that's how he worded it. You're gonna be given a set of tools.
Yeah.
That's what he said.
Yeah.
Yep.
So all right, well, let's switch gears. Let's jump to Avalon. Let's talk about the work here, because I was excited when I was at Gulf Breeze. We were close by, obviously, and we were on the south side of I-10. You were on the north side of I-10. So,
Yep.
And so we were right here together. But when I started hearing about it, and Avalon wasn't picked yet, but I knew the area.
Right.
Y'all were planting, and I was excited about that. Because you just don't hear as much about churches actually planting. You hear about splits, and you hear about negative things, but church plant, that's exciting to me, because that means that also the church is healthy, and the church where you were was healthy enough to see that as well, and for it not to look like an actual split or anything, for it to actually be, we're going to take a group here that have decided, and there was already an eldership in place. Like all the parts were in place even before the building was ever built. I mean, all those plans. And so just let's talk about the work here at Avalon, what it looks like right now, but how it got here. Okay.
All right. So I started preaching for the Margaret Street Church in 2006. I think that's right. 2006. And I had heard talks of a previous men's meeting. Elders and several of the men from the congregation had met together, and they had made, I think, like a 5-year plan, what turned out to be a 5-year plan. And a part of that plan for Margaret Street was to plant a new congregation. And so I think that's very important. You brought up the idea of a split. One of the things that we did as we were planting and as we were telling local congregations what we were going to do, we were trying our best to broadcast this idea that Margaret Street is not splitting. There are no problems, and because that's kind of the mindset, that's what we're used to. If a new church starts, it's starting most likely because another church had problems.
Yeah.
and I know that happens. And so, but we wanted to clarify that, we were starting in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm.
We were starting because of the intentional plans of the leadership at Margaret Street. Yeah. And so that paved the way. And by the way, I maybe heard a little bit about church planting and considered some ideas of church planting before, but never before getting to Margaret Street, like we've ended up doing. But the idea also was, so Margaret Street was kind of at a crossroads. Somebody had described it as being root bound, which I think is probably a good analogy. We were growing capacity wise. The building wasn't really comfortable anymore. So you have two options. Then you can either build bigger or you can plant. And so we had already talked about planting. That was the plan. So it was just a good time. At the same time, Troy Spradlin, who had been our missionary in Paraguay, was coming back to the States. He had a great relationship with Margaret Street because when he graduated from Southwest, he moved to Milton, lived in Milton for 6 months, was a member, he and his wife were members at Margaret Street, getting to know the congregation. So when they became our missionaries, it wasn't like we were just sending money to some random people. It was, we knew them. So anyway, it was time for them to come back. And so we had already been talking. I knew that he was interested in coming back to this area. It just seemed like a good fit. So basically the elders at Margaret Street allowed Troy and me to decide which of us wanted to stay and which wanted to go, which is a fantastic, it wasn't that they were, we want this person, you leave. It was you guys decide, which is phenomenal.
Right.
Troy had been on the mission field for a while and wanted some stability. And I was all about evangelism and going, and this is an adventure for me, and it still is. So we decided in that way. The elders backed it. You mentioned, we had men in place to be there, but this was one of the things, when we started thinking about, okay, how are we going to do this? The elders allowed the members to self-select as well.
Right.
Whoever wanted to go and be a part of this, the elders didn't stop them, but actually encouraged them, which makes for a pretty good congregation when you know ahead of time you're going to be planting, and in order to survive, you're going to have to be evangelistic. You're going to have to push in that way. So you get the individuals that are that are minded in that way, that mindset. So it's just, man, it's been a dream. And so now where we are, we have a building capacity of 144. So we purposely locked ourselves in. We didn't want a big building to have to ultimately fill. We kept ourselves small, so when we get to a certain size, we have to send out another group. So Margaret Street planted Avalon, and Avalon is determined to be a church plant that plants other churches. In fact, we've been in talks already with the eldership at Margaret Street about plans for the future. Nothing set in stone right now, but we're getting these discussions going. And so we're going to probably send out a group from Margaret Street and a group from Avalon to start another congregation in the future.
And I love that. And one of the things we were talking about the other day too, and I remember now that Memphis had come down to campaign. And so, and I thought that was, that really made a lot of sense, using the students on campaign to come into an area also to kind of test the water, so to speak. Kind of test the interest. And to see what was there. And I think that was done in two different locations.
Exactly.
And so, and maybe at two different times, I can't remember what.
No,
it was during the same time frame.
Yeah, we had two campaigns while I was at Margaret Street. It was the second one that we utilized, that we door knocked in two different areas. And we found the most interest in this community. And so that's why so Memphis was a big part of why we planted where we did.
I love that. But I wanted to make sure that, that we were talking about that. That was known because, we get to go on campaigns when we're in school, and so that's important too, because that's practical experience, door knocking, and people can debate about door knocking and all that, but there's really no other way than to get out there with people, and to gauge the interest, and find out where people are.
And let me say this too, I'm not going to talk about names or whatever, but I went out and I door knocked along with the students, and at least one of the students, there were others, we were having the conversation about what we were doing.
Yeah.
And so I think for the most part, some of the students had never considered the idea of church planting. So not only were we doing it and getting help from them, at the same time we were introducing the concept of church planting to these guys. And I had a recent conversation not long ago with one that remembered that discussion and has been following what we've been doing, and it's a consideration in his mind.
That's great. And I think that's important too, because obviously when you're in school, there's a drive. Evangelism is just it's why you're there. It's part of why you're there. You want to be the best evangelist that you can be, not just the best behind the pulpit.
Right.
You want to be the best evangelist. So there's that mindset of ministering and of being an evangelist as well. So you get all of the aspects, especially while you're in school too. And so I think that there is a very practical part to that. There's a lot of zeal that's there, and so when these guys, hopefully, they'll tune back into all of those things, those experiences, and I think that's great. When I was thinking about the work here, because this is, you still, I heard Ed, one of the elders, talking about, we still consider ourselves a mission church, and in search of another mission point, really, and so I think that's great. The idea of planting and watering and all that was brought up several times while we were here over the weekend. Is there a particular struggle in the area that makes this work more difficult?
I don't know yet, but and I say that because the first several years that after we planted, we've only been in the building a year, and we just turned 7 years old.
Yeah.
So we spent several years outside of a building. We were meeting in a middle school. The whole COVID thing happened, so we get locked out of all of the schools.
Right.
We spend time under a pole barn, in houses, ultimately in community centers. All of that to say this is that it's hard to gauge our evangelism efforts and successes and experiences with the community because we were so transient, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I think what that ended up doing, by the way, it's not an answer to your question, but that time helped us, I think, grow as a congregation, growing in this mindset of being that really, when you're moving around, you feel like a mission work.
Yeah.
And so it helped set this culture that we have, where you said that you heard one of our elders saying yesterday about talking about planting and watering. You can ask any of our members what's Avalon about, and they'll respond, planting and watering.
Yeah.
That's what we do. So now that we're a year with stability in a place, what we've been trying to do is just get out and into the community around us, canvassing. Next week we're going to have like a little door knocking school kind of crash course, and we're going to go out and put that into use. But we've been trying to canvass the area. I don't know that we've had super big struggles yet.
Yeah.
Not enough to know, what are we facing, because to our advantage, we have a congregation filled with young people, and we have a community filled with young families, and young families here, young families in the community. So I think that is attractive. But I will say this: there's another church, and it's a denominational outfit that meets in the middle school that we were meeting in.
Yeah.
And so our competition right now has to do with, it's a performance kind of, entertainment driven thing. But we're in the community. People are getting to know us, and so we'll see how that plays out.
Well, I think because the fact that the congregation was transient and having to meet in so many different places, and adjust to that. I'm sure it did set a culture of that, but it also probably brought you so close together.
Absolutely.
And that's special. I think that doesn't always happen.
Yeah, I mean, we've been in each other's homes, and that's and we I tell you what, that is kind of, I will say this, talking about a challenge. One challenge that we've seen is because of the amount of community that we have outside of a building. One challenge we have is getting the people that we're connecting with outside of the building in living rooms or whatever into the building, on Sunday worship. So that is, it's an interesting challenge, but it is a legitimate one. It's just because people are used to these small group kind of Bible studies,
Right.
in the middle of the week, and now you're going to throw them into kind of a loud crowd or whatever on Sunday
Right.
morning. Sometimes that's a challenge, but anyway,
That's a good problem there.
That's a great
I
problem.
love that.
Yeah, yeah.
That's great. Is there anything, my last question. So obviously with 416 Ministries, we're traveling, we want to encourage preachers, we want to encourage congregations. Is there anything that in your years of ministry that has helped you kind of overcome, because we get discouraged. There's no shying away from that. That's just who, the work we're in, it's difficult and all that. Is there anything that's been helpful to you during your time of preaching that might be helpful for others as they're listening and watching this?
Well, going back to the idea of just remembering my past and talking about the school of preaching early on, and I'm not saying that it's out of the question now, but especially early on after graduating, there were days when I had to pick up the phone and I had to call. I talked to Bobby. By that time, Bobby came in, Brother Liddell came in during my second year. So he was just down in Memphis. We were up in Martin, and I called and talked to him, more than once, other instructors as well. So that's one thing, the idea of reaching out and especially to people that have been through it before.
Sure.
And connecting with other people that are on the same path as you, same experiences, other preachers. I look back and I think, especially in the early years when I was at Bethel in Martin, Tennessee, Larry Powers was preaching in the area and still is actually.
Yeah.
But Larry and I would travel back and forth to Memphis for like the third year program and things like that. And he was just great, just a great encouragement, being able to talk things out and talk things through. So, younger, inexperienced preachers getting together with guys that have been through it, I think that's a big thing. And I would even say that regarding families, husbands and wives.
Sure.
I think, I'll say this very quickly, I think that wives, a lot of times, they have to experience things that the preacher himself doesn't necessarily. And so I think getting together with other couples and families that have been through this, and that's always a benefit.
And I think that's one thing that we're finding too, and hopefully, Cindy and I both are able to help, preaching couples especially, but preachers' wives as they're going through things too. I know Cindy wants to be there, for as many as she can be too. And speaking of Cindy, she, I know, has a question she wants to ask.
I do. I like to ask a question at the end, just if somebody's traveling through here, because this is a vacation destination.
Right.
And so if somebody makes their way, finds y'all, and is visiting on a Sunday, do you have a recommendation of a place that they could go eat? I'm sure there are so many good places around here, but what would you recommend? I know what I would recommend after Friday night.
Right. It's the Fishing Hole. There's a place
place.
right down the road called the Fishing Hole. In fact, I had heard it advertised on the radio for a couple of years, and then they just opened up one over here. The other was in Pensacola. So we had it a few weeks ago, and I don't know how many people we've taken and talked about taken over to it. So yeah, the Fishing Hole.
And it is no doubt, it's good. It
You
really
had
was.
egg grouper, you had shrimp. Did you
Yep.
have shrimp?
Yep.
It was so good. Everything. It was
Yeah.
delicious.
Yeah, it really
They
was.
even knew how to cook grits.
Yes. Yeah, cooked them well.
Yes.
They did.
Absolutely.
They were on it. So certainly we'll have the in the show notes in the description, we'll have the information for Avalon. And so if you have any questions about church plant, maybe reach out to Preston and the elders here and talk with them. I know they'd love to talk about the work some more. Preston, thanks for sitting down with us.
Thank you.
And we'll see you further down the road.